Anna Glavinsky on TRE in the afternoon.
And now we're talking about the Midlife Male Handbook, a man's guide to thriving through the andropause. James Davis is here to speak to us all about it. Good afternoon, Jay. So I've actually been saying that the andropause is like the male menopause. But now I'm panicking that I've just explained it all wrong and there's just like not the right terminology to use. So I'm going to pass that over to you. And can you explain to us what it is?
Yeah, I can. Thanks for having me on. So your terminology isn't wrong. It's a shorthand way. A lot of people use it that way, male menopause. But of course, that's incorrect. Because men don't have a menstrual cycle to pause. The menopause is very specific to women. And I think we have to be careful with language. We're not be seen to hijack the menopause experience. But where there are similarities, andropause is likely to occur at a similar stage in a man's life cycle that menopause would occur for a woman. And it is also due to declining sex hormones. So in a nutshell, what's happening is with perimenopause and menopause for females, primary sex hormones are progesterone and estrogen. They're fluctuating and then dropping off, happening in quite a narrow window of time, given the overall life cycle. So the symptoms can be quite pronounced for a lot of women. For men, the primary sex hormone is testosterone. Now that peaks in our 20s and declines at a steady rate, 1 to 3% per year, which doesn't sound a lot. But when you're compounding that, by the time a man in his 50s, it could be 30 to 50% lower than it was. And then he'll start to notice things like increasing body fat, particularly around the middle, losing strength, muscle mass, low energy, low libido, trouble focusing, low level anxiety, dipping in confidence. All these kind of things can come and start to play. So male menopause is a kind of easy way to describe it, but probably a term we want to shy away from.
And I mean, there's so much to it because, like you say, with the women's menopause, it's about that shut-off point where you can no longer reproduce. You know, you have this window of time and then literally that door is shut. But, and again, forgive me if I'm like completely getting my science wrong, but men can have kids so much further on in their years, so much older. Do they also have this sort of shut window? Is this time that you're talking about a door shutting process?
Yeah, I wouldn't say for men it's not a door shutting in the same way. So you're quite right there. For women, after they've gone through menopause and they're postmenopausal, they can no longer have children. For men, we will continue to be able to produce sperm to have children. For ages, there's lots of rock stars examples that they've had kids in their 80s and stuff. So the door's not shutting in that way. I think what happens with men is it comes more with a realization that their physicality is letting them down. And that can lead to quite some existential soul searching. And it normally happens at this point in life where perhaps we're questioning our choices in life to getting us where we are, our position. Men tend to define themselves very much in terms of their career roles. And often those careers can be coming to an end, whether enforced or voluntary. And then they can lead to big identity questions about what's next for me and where do I go from here?
And so do you look at it more on equal measures, an emotional thing, and that's perhaps fed into by society? You're saying that men are sort of losing their careers perhaps at this time, and then it's harder to get back into a job once you've lost one when you're older. So it's like that emotional toll versus actual physical changes that are happening in the body.
It's a bit of both, and they kind of drive psychological pressure on each other. I think if your body's starting to feel like it's letting you down a bit, if your energy is not what it was, if you notice that you're getting out of breath more, you are putting on more body fat, your muscles going down, again, that can be very wrapped up in your own identity of being a man. So that will have a psychological pressure. But at the same time, testosterone plays a role in cognitive function, in confidence level. So if that testosterone is low and those things are affected, we're going to start doubting ourselves more. Now, just throw in, something like a relationship breakdown, a long-term relationship, a marriage that breaks down, and or ending of career, and you've got the kind of the perfect sweet spot for what can be quite a tough time for a lot of men.
And do you think society has a role to play in how men feel during that time? Could it be different? Could it be a more positive or negative experience versus on when or where you live?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more that could be done. So what I've observed with menopause, we don't have to look back too far to when it wasn't really talked about. Then we've had a kind of explosion in talking about menopause. It's now seen quite rightly as a very empowering phase of women's life. They've accumulated lots of wisdom and knowledge. They're moving on to this next stage. Unfortunately, we still seem to be at the place where maybe we were with menopause 10 years ago, where for men, we can talk about the midlife crisis and we'll kind of laugh and go, you're going to get a sports car and how tragic, And I did see this actually in a tabloid newspaper, and they had someone who bought a book out on menopause, and the clickbait headlines kind of like, I had an affair, left my husband and quit my job. And it was all framed in like, this is so empowering, and rightly so. But if we applied the same thing to a man, it'd be like, oh, that's all very sad and tragic. So I think there's a long way to go to kind of get it to the same level of understanding. I think also the other thing is, sadly, we do know that there's a mental health crisis for men, particularly at midlife. If we're of that age group, being culturally conditioned to kind of believe in staying quiet, not talking about our feelings, not opening up, which means we can carry a lot of pressure at the time this is happening. Then if we're mocked for it, we can find that even harder to deal with.
And so your book, it includes a 30-day program. That almost sounds like a short amount of time to address something that started years ago and is going to carry on for many more years. What's the thinking behind it?
Yeah, the thing about it is to give people the foundational tools to start making changes so they can embed them and start using them over the longer term. And also, you don't want it to be too frightening. If you say someone's like, oh, you've got to do this for 90 days, people are like, oh, wow, But these tools are really simple, because I think a misconception we have about personal transformation of any kind is that it's got to be this one big thing we do that changes everything. Or in fact, the truth is it's lots of small micro adjustments that over time build up. So the program is it's very evidence-based. So we're looking at, what are the physical components. We know that for men, lifting heavy weights with what we call compound moves that use lots of muscle groups will actually elevate testosterone levels. We know if we want to get body fat down, we want to do cardio, but we don't want to do too much. So we go into a stress response and work against what we're trying to achieve. But then in tandem with that, we recognize that the testosterone is also affecting our cognition and our emotions. So what are we going to do to develop a more positive mindset and set goals and move forward? So it's just about all those different layers that come together that are quite easy to integrate, that over a short space of time can make a big difference.
And how much of the advice is different because of the age group of men that you're targeting and speaking to, as opposed to stuff that you would be suggesting to a 20-year-old?
Well, it's interesting. I think the thing I've learned personally, as you get older, you definitely need more recovery time. I think sleep is important for everyone, but as you get older, it becomes more important. Sleep plays a very important role in your hormone health. From workouts, I think when we're in our 20s, 30s, we're kind of like, oh, I can eat what I want. I can have burgers 3 times this week, and then I'll just burn it off at the gym with a hard workout. And you find that doesn't work in the same way. Our metabolism's slower to respond. We need more time to recover from workout. So it's more about how can we work out in line with the evidence and get more bang for our buck from a shorter workout and more recovery time.
And you also mentioned mental health earlier, which is a really, really important topic, especially amongst men. And so when you were researching this field for your book, were there any discoveries that particularly surprised you, that you didn't see coming? And what's the sort of bigger picture statement that you've got to say in that field?
Yeah, I think the biggest shock for me was the fact that, unfortunately, the midlife men is the highest suicide cohort. And the rate is almost 5 times that of women of all ages. And when that hit me, I was like, well, there's actually quite a significant issue here. That's a big differential. So that was a thing. And I think that's not an easy problem to solve, because it is to do with hormone levels, it's to do with life circumstances, it's to do with your psychology, it's to do with whether you've been raised to kind of open up and seek help or not. So these are the things I think men need to understand. And if they are feeling in a place where they're feeling pressure, it's just think about, okay, where can I go to express this? How can I open up?
And you must have, you're saying it's all evidence-based as well. You must have had to speak to a lot of people. Where did you go to investigate?
Well, it's interesting. So I've been in this space for like over a decade, and I was actually delivering workshops into organizations. I go into organizations and talk about andropause. I do menopause, allyship, and other things, stress. But it was a combination of two things. Like I delivered a program for a firm, and then just one of the feedback was this: it was great, but is all this information in a book somewhere? And I was like, oh no one has written a book on that. And coincidentally, it was about the same time I'd been toying with the idea. But as I was approaching my 50th, I kind of went through this slump myself. I noticed I was came a bit withdrawn, a bit isolated, didn't really want to put myself out there. I just felt like my mojo had gone. I thought, this is really interesting. I talk about this stuff. It's now happening to me. But I've got the toolkit to bring myself out of it. I need to share this toolkit so other people can get there as well.
You've almost answered the next question that I wanted to ask there, actually, which is about sort of putting your heart on your sleeve, because it's all very well sort of writing in a book, speaking to scientists, professionals. But at some point, you have to speak to other men, other guys, your peers, your mates, your family members will be reading this book and possibly having conversations with you about it. And then you have to look them in the eye and speak to them on a personal level and make that connection, which you say, men at a certain age often start missing out on. So how do you approach that?
I just try and be as open as I can be, and hope that when I do that, that gives permission to other men to open up as well. And, normally it does. I've been sitting in a pub and seen got talking to two guys I don't know, and it's gone on for like 45 minutes, an hour. And at the end, one of the guys actually talked to me. He said, I see the same group of men every week, day in, day out, and we never have conversations like this. And I'm just realizing how important it is. So that taking the first step, and might just be, like a trusted friend, a close friend, taking that first step to kind of open up about, oh, you know what, I've been feeling a bit like this recently, can really give permission for the other person to open up as well. And, it is true, a problem shared. Once we can start to vocalize it and talk about it, it can lift some of the pressure off.
It's a really powerful story, actually. I reckon many people listening to this can be like nodding along, because they can literally picture that scenario of guys hanging out with each other, spending loads of time together, but never actually digging beneath the surface. So I guess books like yours are really starting to open up that conversation. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap it all up?
No, I would just want to say, if you're a man and you are kind of, 40 plus, and you've been recognizing any of the symptoms we talked about there, I would say that there are lots of solutions for you. There's stuff you can do with your lifestyle, the stuff we've been talking about, which can really help you. Of course, do go to your health professional as well. A simple blood test will tell you your testosterone levels in your blood. And then there's treatments you can get from there as well. So you don't have to suffer in silence, and don't just chalk it up to stress or aging. Go and get it checked out.
Oh, fantastic. I'm really glad that you mentioned that. So we've just been speaking to James Davis. The book is called The Midlife Male Handbook, A Man's Guide to Thriving Through Andropause. You can get it on Amazon or the Talk Radio Europe bookshop. James, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.